Hello, and welcome to the Tifo Football Podcast. I'm Joe Devine, and I'm joined now by Alex Stewart.
Hello, Joe.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm great because we just spoke to Ian Burchnall.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did. Ian Burchnall is, of course, the manager of Ostersunds FK in the Allsvenskan. Is it the top Swedish league? Allsvenskan?
Yeah, I just call it the Swedish top division. It's
Do you know what I did during this episode, Alex, by accident?
I don't know.
I said Swedish.
Actually, I was going to message you and say, you do realise, but It's because I was trying to say Allsvenskan. I was in my mind, I was getting ready to say it, and then I just bailed. I panicked and bailed out of it, but instead I said Swedish. It's like when Joey Barton did that press conference at Marseille.
So embarrassing. Anyway, look out for that. It's towards the end of the podcast. I say Swedish. Ian Burchnall is, of course, a gentleman and doesn't pull me up on it. So thanks, Ian. Anyway, what did we talk to Ian about? We talked to Ian about loads of things. His coaching philosophy, his day-to-day. We talked to him about man management, all of the sort of, some of the interesting club culture things that Graham Potter brought in when he was there and how they're still going. I love the fact that they do a musical production, or that they did one last summer. That, as you know me well, Alex, that is literally, right, you couldn't be closer up my street than that. Oh, I loved it. We also talked about the fact that Ian is married, of course, and his partner has moved with him to, a couple of different countries, and the impact there, which was very interesting. What else did we talk about, Alex?
Coaching networks.
Yes.
How he deals with all the disparate bits of information that you get as a coach, and how he processes all of that. His kind of personal way of building his day and making sure that he has time to do what he needs to do, but also work with all the other people who are part of his team. It was a really good insight into what it's like to be a top level coach.
I thought so too. And quick shout out to David Priest, who is the goalkeeping coach for Ostersunds, who we did have a question about, but we ran out of time. But it strikes me that maybe we should just ask David to come on and talk to us about what a goalkeeping coach actually does anyway.
I think that's a very sound idea.
Yeah, okay. Hey, listen, if you like us, then you should help us and enjoy yourself at the same time by visiting theathletic.com/Tifo. There you will find some form of free trial to, what is it called? The Athletic. Do you like The Athletic, Alex?
I very much like The Athletic, Joe.
Why do you, though?
Because I can read about football and other sports.
Yeah, and exceptionally well-written journalism.
Actually, this is a random one, but last week, I think it was, I read Bill Shea, who's one of the US writers, who I really, really like and does lots of stuff that's not normal kind of sports stuff. And it was about the rise and fall and rise again of the market in baseball trading cards.
Wow.
Which is about as niche as it gets, but it's a fascinating article.
Way to sell The Athletic, Alex. That's definitely, everyone's going to be running and jumping on, from our heavy football fan base. No,
I can't.
The point is, if you're listening, two things. One, if you support a Premier League team or, one of 5 in the Championship or one of 2 in Scotland, then you should try the free trial, because there are journalists that write specifically for you and for your club in an in-depth way that you just don't get outside of local newspapers, and of course you don't get it in the national press, particularly if you're a smaller club. So if you're a fan of a team like Norwich, for example, you should at least check it out, because I'm pretty sure that the quality of writing that you're going to be able to read there and the insight and the access that you're going to get with The Athletic is greater than it is anywhere else. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, if you like Tifo, you should support us by signing up to a free trial, because it helps us a lot. So thanks for that. And you can do that by going to theathletic.com/Tifo. Anyway, without further ado, we leave you in the very, very safe and warm hands of Ian Burchnall. Okay, the first question that we ask all the coaches that join us on the podcast, Ian, is what's your day-to-day like? And please do tell us the details that you think are boring, like, what time do you wake up? What time do you arrive at work? These things are fascinating to us.
Yeah, in terms of waking up, for me, it's pretty much out of my hands. I've got 3 kids, one who's turning 6 tomorrow, actually, one 4 and one 1.5. So it's highly unlikely that my alarm ever wakes me up. So it's normally one of them that gets me up, normally around 6 o'clock in the morning. So they are my alarm clock. So I tend to get up with them and then get myself ready. To be fair, recently I've been trying to get out and go for a quick run before breakfast, but it's I can't say that I do that during the season that much. I'm normally much busier, but at the moment in this Corona situation, I found myself with a little bit more time in the morning and the afternoon, so I'm trying to utilise that. But I normally go into the club around 7:30 into the stadium there. I like to have like an hour, just sit and have a cup of coffee and like clear my mind and go through a few of the bits, certainly around the day and the training sessions and what we're going to be doing during the day and like organise myself a little bit. And then the staff tend to come in any time between 8 and 8:30. We tend to sit down as a staff like 8:30, cup of coffee and just run through the session, availability of players, any changes from what we did the day before. And plan a little bit about each of our roles. Then we have all the players and the staff eat breakfast together then at 9 o'clock. So we sit, eat a breakfast. That's a really good, I think it's something that was brought in before I came, but I think it's grown, especially when Ostersund was in the Europa League, the breakfast has grown and grown and grown. It's become the most elaborate and outrageous breakfast I think I've ever had. And like so many players have got different things that the guys that are doing the breakfast want to cater for. And I think like we've got players that have been at Chelsea and they're like, oh my God, this is the best breakfast we've ever had. So I don't know if Ostersund, we fall short maybe on a lot of things around in football, but breakfast is the thing that we do the best. Then I normally, it's quite a good intro then just to like 9:30 we tend to have meetings with the players, so depending on what day of the week it is or what we've got on that day, but normally present the session and maybe some video clips and things like that around 9:30, and then we tend to train 11 o'clock, eat lunch together, and then the afternoons are normally filled with rewatching the training back, planning the next session, meetings with players, video analysing, preparing things for upcoming games. So it's kind of like that, but every day can be a little bit different based on which day of the week it is. You don't tend to work in days as a football coach. It's more like match day +1 or match day -1, match day -2. So you kind of live your life like that. So you lose track on what day of the week it actually is sometimes.
Right, yeah. Hey, do you mind if I drill down into that a little bit? You said something near the beginning where you arrive an hour earlier than everyone else and sort of clear your mind. That's something I've heard, I guess, leaders say before, which I think is quite a common thing. But and I know this might be a difficult question to answer. You may have answered it already, but what do you mean when you say clear your mind? Do you have particular exercises that you do that, or because it's something I hear quite a lot, but I'm never really sure what it means on a personal basis.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's different for different people, but I like to be well planned, and I like to know that I have things, I know that when the staff come and when the players come, they tend to come with a lot of questions and a lot of wonderings, and 90% of those start to be directed towards yourself. And once the office is full and the players are in, you don't kind of stop, you're talking, engaging with people. And I kind of like that first hour just to have to myself, where I'm kind of like preparing, okay, what do I need to do today? What sort of things do I want to do? Make sure I've got clarity on. And I think I've been more into doing this, certainly since we've had children, my wife and I, and because it's so chaotic. Like I finish work, get home, and it's chaos until the kids are in bed. Then you're like flat out, and then the next day you wake up and I'm like, I need an hour just to like reflect on yesterday or what I'm going to do today before the mayhem of everybody coming in and questions and maybe press or journalists and things like that. So I think it's more just to have that time to yourself where you can go through your own process of perhaps I like to relook at the training session and make sure I've got absolutely everything clear, because once the staff come in and we start talking about it, it can go off sometimes in different tangents as well, the discussion around the session or players. And so I like to have that time just to totally be clear on what I hope to do for that day.
Pep Guardiola in the great series of books by Marty Pernerel talks about going to his office, and it's very kind of Spartan and spare, and he sits there and reflects and solves problems and so on. Is your office similarly free of distractions so that you can kind of just focus on the problem in hand, or is it full of like tactics boards and upcoming things that are happening and, you know, pot plants and so on?
No, there's no pot plants. And I would guess that I would assume Guardiola's office is slightly bigger than mine. But I would say it's fairly minimal. There's not a lot in there. There's a small meeting desk. There's my own desk, some chairs for people that come in, a big screen that I can watch games back on, and a couple of tactics boards, and like of course, all the players mapped out and systems. And then, but in the big main office we kind of have a lot more, you know, of the calendars and all of those kind of things. And I think often I keep the office door open because I like to hear what's going on in the office and like to engage with the staff and talk and discuss with them. But at the same time, sometimes you do just need to close the door and focus on your own job or focus on certain things that you want to think about. So I think it is good to have that space and probably similar to that, not too much things going on there because you need to have a bit of clarity, and there's so many things going on in a football club all the time. It's good to have a bit of a quiet space where you can work totally focused.
Do you, when you plan things ahead and you have your sort of bit of solitude, do you tend to think about things? Do you write things down? Do you work in a particular way in terms of retaining information?
Yeah, I do. It's strange when things come to you. You know, it could just be a development of a training session, or it could be an idea around maybe something that you want to address in the media, or it could be something that you want to address with the staff. And it's strange when something, you know, I could be sitting on a plane, but then I just use notes on my phone, you know, and I just write a reminder on my phone there or write notes in.
Do you ever find ones from months ago that you completely forgot?
Do you know what? It's so funny you say that, because I was actually clearing out some stuff on my phone and I was going through the notes, and I actually found notes from the last manager job that I had in Viking over in Norway. And I was like going through, and it was like notes of reminders of things to bring up in board meetings. And it was quite funny to read them. And I was going, my God, yeah, I didn't get that. So it was, but it is good to sometimes find some of those notes. And the same with tactics, you know, you have ideas around things that are going to be important. And I don't tend to have those. Some people talk about having them in the middle of the night and having to write them down so they can sleep. But I don't tend to have that, but certainly something pops into your mind that I want to write it down before I forget about it, because that can happen.
A lot of, kind of workplace teams use systems like Trello or Google Calendar or whatever. And you're obviously in a position where you're overseeing not just lots of disparate groups in terms of coaches and analysts and players, but also information is presented to them in lots and lots of different ways. So you might be getting spreadsheets in from your analysts and video in from your analysts and trying to disseminate that out. How do you stay on top of all of these different types of information that are presented in different ways? Is there just like you've got a notebook that everything goes into and you pull it all into that, or is it slightly more chaotic than that?
It's probably a bit more chaotic, I think. I wish it was as streamlined as that, but it's not. Probably not. But I think one thing that I've probably learned over the past few years is to understand what parts you need to have total control over and what parts you need to have like trust in others to do. And like the physios that we've got on the medical team are fantastic. We've got like a Ostersunds Dropbox that everything goes into, you know, injury updates and profiling of the players, wellness scores, everything goes into this Dropbox, and they're constantly updating it. And it's that kind of stuff is there for me to use when I want it. But, you know, I don't feel that I need to. I feel like the medical team have got really good control. I can have short briefs with them in the morning about individual players and get a summary from them. But if I need more detail, I know I can always go or refer back to that. The analyst comes with a lot of information, and I think a skill that you need to have is working out which bits are really important in that moment, which bits you need for the upcoming game, and which bits you don't want to focus on. Because like we can get a Y-Scout report, for example, after a game, and it's like 40 pages of data, and you've really got to work out which bits which bits are important to you in that moment, because you get fed with so much stuff. If you try to utilize it all, I think your brain might explode. So you need to work out which bits are important. So we have, like, of course, you know, a head of recruitment has got his Dropbox file, which he's constantly updating with players and recruitment patterns, and the analyst is putting things in there and session plans. So kind of feeds into one thing, but it's separate within that. So I can kind of choose which bits I want to go in and really look in detail at.
Can I ask? I want to come on to talk about your coaching philosophy in a moment, but beforehand, it sort of struck me when I was reading about you beforehand, Ian. You ended up at Salzburg with Brian Dean. You went along with Brian. Obviously, at Ostersunds. Am I right in thinking that you were there sort of partly on the basis of Graham Potter's suggestion?
Yeah, I mean, I've never actually asked Graham that, to be honest. I spoke to him a few weeks ago. Yeah, and I know that they would have asked Graham for a reference from me, and I know, because I've known Graham for many years, I'm pretty sure Graham would have been a good reference for me. So, yeah. And I think that he really built his identity into the team over a 7-year period. And I think when they wanted a new coach, they wanted one that wasn't going to just rip it up and go, okay, now it's my way. One that was maybe thinking along similar sort of lines in terms of playing style, in terms of methodology, in terms of leadership. So I think they didn't want wholesale changes. I mean, I came into this job, I was 35 when I got the job, and Graham was 35 when he took over at Ostersund. Of course, they're in different, very, very different, like now we're in the top league in Sweden. At the time, they're in the 4th tier. So it's a different challenge now. But I think they saw perhaps me as a lot of similar characteristics. And I think Graham probably endorsed that as well, because he knew me. And I think, of course, I still went for a job interview and did all the formalities, but I certainly think Graham will have helped in that process, yeah.
Can I ask then, off the back of that, how important is it, do you think, because this is a question that I don't hear asked very often, and that I don't think I've ever asked a coach before, but it strikes me after reading about your sort of career path, obviously it's a huge part of it, networking. How important, and I don't mean that in a schmoozing kind of way, but like, how important is it in coaching?
It's hugely important. It's hugely important, because I know really good coaches that are absolutely hopeless at talking or discussing or networking or finding their place, and I was really, really poor at it, I think. And I think actually Brian helped me a little bit with that, because I was at Bradford City in the academy there, and I was coaching John Hendry's son, Luke Hendry, who's at Grimsby now. And John knew Brian very well. And Brian was doing his coaching badges, and John had said, oh, well, why don't you come down and have a look at Luke's group and Ian's coaching, and you can get taught with Ian. Ian's done his badges, and maybe you can help each other. And Brian came down, and I could see he wasn't that connected with maybe coaching the kids. He wanted to work with older players, and at the time I was the University of Leeds coach. So I invited him just to come and be around the university, and he ended up coming in and working together with me at the university for a couple of years. And I always had this feeling that when I was around top players or top coaches or professionals, that I kind of didn't quite belong at that table, because I hadn't been a player. No one knew who I was. I hadn't proved anything in a coaching capacity, really. And so I always felt uncomfortable in those situations. But actually, Brian was like, hey, you should be sat at these tables. You're a good coach. You can do this. And he heard that from a guy with 20 years playing experience. And the fact that when I coached, he was like impressed, or he enjoyed it, and he was reflecting on things and experiences and coaches he'd worked with, and maybe, you're a bit similar to him or him. And I think that made me think, right, well, maybe I do belong around in these environments, and maybe I shouldn't be afraid to discuss my thoughts and opinions and network a little bit more. And I think from there, I did become a bit more comfortable and realize the value of it as well, because, the more people you know and connect with, and, the football world is quite transient and changes, and as you kind of find your path through football, I think the more people that network with and work with, obviously really helps you.
Do you think that's become increasingly important as clubs look to build a philosophy and have continuity in that philosophy, rather than just employing a series of head coaches who are good at coaching?
Yeah, I mean, I think that. Yeah, I mean, I think that a network like that is very important. I think that clubs. I've been at clubs where the head coach has changed or the manager has changed, and the whole remit of the youth academy starts to change because they're thinking about football in a different way. And you get one coach in, maybe you get like an old experienced coach just to stabilise the club, and then after a period of time, maybe results aren't good, they want to change, and they think, well, that's not worked, so we'll do the polar opposite, and we'll get a young guy in. And when they get this young guy in, after a period of time, if he fails, they'll think, right, we need a bit more experience, or we need to do things different. So you kind of jump from that hasn't worked, we'll do the opposite. But then the entire structure of the club has to start to change along with it. And I think that can be really problematic. So finding a path for the club, I think, and an identity and what they, a target for what they should be doing is really important as a start point. And then you can say, okay, what kind of characteristics from the coaches? Ostersunds were absolutely crystal clear with what characteristics were important to them. So it was much easier then to maybe reach into that network and find a coach that fit.
So when you then apply for a job there, are you going on the basis that you already know that they're buying into your overall philosophy and therefore they want to know how you're going to approach that? Or are you also trying to sell, this is my philosophy and then I'm going to implement it in this kind of way? Do you think that's more of a thing that coaches are having to do nowadays?
I think it's important when you go for a job that or you've done your research on the kind of club and the identity of the club that it is and whether or not you're a good fit. Because that way, of course, you're not wasting anybody's time when you go. I think it's important that you're totally honest when you go and talk to clubs about how you want to work, because you can always tell them what they want to hear. But then if you do it your own way anyway, which is different, you can quickly come into some problems. So I think just to have that frank chat at the start about how you work. But I knew how Ostersunds were playing. I knew how Graham was working. I knew that it's not the same, but we have a lot of similar principles and a lot of similar values. So I knew that when the club were looking for somebody new, that I would go there. It was really interesting because, over the course of the 6 years that I've been in Norway, I kind of put together my own document about how I want to play, style, training methodology, value system, leadership, all of this sort of stuff. And then I kind of, when I knew I was going to talk to Ostersund, I put it all together in I don't know what it is, maybe 60 pages and put it together specific for Ostersund. And I brought it with me to the interview, and I didn't even get it out of my bag because the chairman, I think, had already done his research on me. He'd already looked into the way in which I worked. He kind of done everything really. So it was more a chat about, look, what do you want? Where do you see yourself going? He said several times, football's very simple. We know how you work. You know how the club works. If we can come to an agreement, then we can sort it. So, I think in this case, the club had done a lot of research on me and they knew exactly what they wanted. But I think in a lot of circumstances, it's good to go in with your template of exactly how you want to work. So the club know, okay, this is exactly what we want or not.
Given that you have no use for that document now, Ian, will you send it to us?
Yes, I will. No, yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I don't know how interesting reading it is. But
I'm sure it is. I bet it is. And you know what? I was going to ask you anyway, because we use the word philosophy here. I'm delighted to hear that you've got it in a kind of an Ian-shaped Bible. What is your philosophy? 60 pages, so we'll have to summarise. But what is your philosophy?
Do you know what? Even with this document that you put together, over the last 2 years, it's evolving and changing. Because your experiences change it, so it's kind of a breathing document that is evolving all the time. But I would say the fundamental principles are to try to develop a team that wants to play, and it's a lot of people say this, but exciting, offensive, attack-minded football. To be able to have control of the game, mainly with the ball, but also without the ball, and I think that's become one of the biggest things that I've kind of evolved to is I've always been we want to attack and we want to dominate the game, and it's very good to say that, but it is also player dependent, and it is also dependent on the characteristics of the players that you've got. And certainly when you come into a team, you might have to adapt that philosophy a little bit to get you to take the steps that you want to be able to take, and be able to control the game without the ball from a defensive structure is really important. So I think I've evolved a little bit from that. But certainly, I think quite a lot about the characteristics of the players that you want to have in your team. Brave players, players that are comfortable playing under pressure, that are not afraid to make mistakes. So to develop these kind of players within your philosophy, I think it's important to understand the kind of players you want to develop, because they ultimately are the ones that are going to deliver on the pitch for you. So I have, of course, an overall objective of how a perfect game would look. And then I think we have to work with the players' characteristics to fit in with that model, and then also have a plan for when the game isn't perfect, which is quite often, and how do we still find a way to win the game.
So when you say characteristics, do you mean like psychological characteristics rather than physical?
Yeah, I mean, of course, like I was asked this question not long ago, actually, about our like recruitment process and what sort of things do we look for in our recruitment process. And I was saying to them that I understand, especially in Ostersund, like if Guardiola in Man City or Klopp is spending 100 million, they're pretty clear with the exact characteristics and technical competencies, tactical competencies of that player, because you're buying one of the world's best, if not the world's best. Whereas we are, of course, recruiting from a totally different pool. So we have an understanding that there are going to be many probably deficiencies in the players that we have to work with. But so one of the biggest things for me in terms of characteristics for looking at players is the mindset, first of all, is the mindset of the player there with a view to learn, develop, improve, and has the right kind of mental capacity to be able to do that. Because I think that's really important, because you can have a player that, we can have a player that's 6'5", fantastic defender, but is struggling with the ball in the build-up play. Well, we can work with the technical competencies, but if his mindset won't allow it because he doesn't want to do that, doesn't believe he can do that, or doesn't have the right capacity to learn and develop, then we're probably not going to take him any further than he is. So I think the mental characteristics in recruitment are massively important, because if you get them right, you've got a team of players that you can adapt and mould and build into your way of playing.
Do you know, Julian Nagelsmann said that management for him is 30% tactics and 70% social competence. And I guess that he means, in a way, man management there, and in a way, common sense as well. Do you agree with that? What do you think?
Yeah, I would agree with that, because I think you can, and I've over the years, I've spoke to lots of coaches, some coaches and some analysts that are absolutely unbelievable, like tactical minds. And some coaches are great tactical minds on the board, but struggle to then convey it and deliver that onto the pitch to the players. And some can have training sessions, but they don't have the communication skills or the social skills to get the buy-in from the players. And I think, there's so many different styles, and I don't think there isn't a right or wrong way of playing. There's many different ways to try to win the game, and like people can talk about Guardiola or Klopp, or then they can talk about Tony Pulis or Big Sam. But you know what's amazing about, say, those guys, or if you watch a lot of the stuff with Neil Warnock, is like their ability to gain buy-in from the players, probably via their social competencies, is a massive management skill. And then tactics is a smaller part of it, because if you don't get the first part right, that you don't connect the players with the subject and you can't get them to buy into it, I think it's very hard to even scratch the surface on the quality of the tactics.
When Graham Potter was at Ostersunds, a lot was made of the off-the-pitch stuff that he was doing, so dance performances, reading groups, that kind of stuff, which is all part of creating this buy-in. Is that something that you've continued with, or is that part of his regime and you've got your own ways of doing it?
No, I have continued it, I have to say. That is because it's in the contract of every player and coach that we have to take part in the club's cultural activities. So, the first year we did a musical production. I sang on stage, danced.
What was the production in?
It was like a musical comedy. We did it together with a professional theatre company, which is called Gladder Huddick. They've actually been out in New York, and they work together with a lot of Down syndrome or learning disability people, and they're absolutely unbelievable. They were unbelievable to work with, and we could together with them produced this. It was some singing, some dancing, some comedy sketches. It was like a story of Ostersunds through the time, played out as a musical. So we did that, and then this year we did.
Did you love it?
No. No. Do you know what? I loved working with the Gladder Huddick, and I loved working with the people that were doing it. I kind of like the process was really interesting. The players, to be honest, I understand why Graham and the club implemented a lot of these things, because what they wanted to do was take players totally out of a comfort zone and challenge them to do things they didn't think that they were capable of doing, which, like, as a human fundamental principle, is really, really good to do. And it does bring people together. And so, like, we were going to singing classes and dance classes during the year, and sometimes they can be hard, because if you've lost on a Sunday and on Monday afternoon you've got to go to a dance class, but actually it ends up you don't want to do it, and then after you've done it you think, actually, that was quite good. Even though you look absolutely ridiculous dancing and we sound ridiculous singing. But
I bet you didn't, though. I mean, honestly, I'm sure that's some kind of, maybe that's where you're self-conscious as opposed to being part of football. This is it.
And I think that's what it is like every player and coach has to expose probably their fears and their biggest vulnerabilities of like doing something so uncommon to them in front of big audiences. There's like 500 in a full theatre there.
But you do it together.
Yeah, the whole club does it. And so we did the production. This year we did it was a range of comedy sketches and another theatre production, basically, a lot of singing and dancing. But afterwards, the feeling from the players is that of like, we've just won a game, because you get, especially like the 3 days before, when the season finishes, then we work towards this culture project. And like the three or 4 days before, where we're doing the final rehearsals, honestly, this year we were looking at each other going, this is going to be a disaster. This is going to be a disaster. We can't do this. We've not a clue what we're doing. We're not standing in the right place. You're going on stage at the wrong time. We're going to look idiots. And then it's like everybody kind of says, right, pull yourself together. We've got to sort this out. We can't look like fools in front of the whole town. And then like we end up doing it. And the fans all come down. They think it's great. It's a great way to connect with the supporters. And at the end of it, it's kind of like, wow, that was a great achievement that we managed to do that together. Yeah. And I think it binds the group. And I think, I'm not sure something like that. I'm pretty sure Graham doesn't do Dance Swan Lake with the Brighton team. But I think he probably has some of those principles of take players out of a comfort zone, show vulnerability, make them overcome something they don't think they could do, to improve them as a human being, because I think when you start doing that, you're going to get a better player. So I think it's a really interesting concept. And of course, I've carried it on, partly because it's in my contract, and partly because I also think the club has gone from 4th division to Europa League. And then the first question I asked when I came in is, what things have really worked for you guys? Because they're the things I don't want to take away. I want to make sure I embrace them.
Right. Do you know what? I mean, listening to you talk about it, though, I love that idea. I can't think of anything short of maybe a dancing-related injury that is negative about doing that. And, it makes me think the showing vulnerability aspect of it is obviously very important. But the fact that everyone does it together, I mean, I can imagine that builds real camaraderie. And that presumably might give you a little bit of an advantage.
Well, I think that's the hope, really. I mean, if you look at the league structure and where we are realistically with budget, we're at the bottom end. And in the 2 seasons under Graham, they finished 8th and then 5th. In my first season, we finished 6th, and last year we finished 12th. We dipped a bit. But overall, we've had 4 seasons probably above where we should be budget-wise. And we have to ask ourselves, okay, we can't pay the same as some of the big clubs. We don't have the same facilities. We don't even have the same recruitment possibilities because, Stockholm is much easier to recruit players into than in the north in Ostersund. So we have to find ways that we can do things different or better than other teams with our resources. And I think this is maybe one of those things.
I'm going to change tact a little bit now and ask you, obviously you were in Norway before you were in Sweden, and you're married, right, with kids?
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Interestingly, this came up in a meeting that we were having yesterday, unrelated to you and this podcast, but one of our colleagues mentioned the idea that we never talk about the partners of athletes or of coaches or managers or whatever. And it struck me that, your partner moving with you to Norway and to Sweden, it's quite a big thing to ask someone to do on a personal level. I mean, was that difficult for you?
It wasn't at first, but I'm really glad you asked that question because now my wife will listen to this podcast because I can tell her she's on it. But do you know what? It is a really interesting one because often I come on podcasts and do talks and I talk about football and talk about everything around football. But actually, it's really, really hard to. We started at the very start of the podcast to talk about how you clear your mind or how you do those kind of things. And I think that it's really, really difficult to focus on your job if things in your background are not stable. So the fact that, my wife comes out and she takes care of the 3 kids and does a hell of a lot of work and has sacrificed quite a lot means that I can have that stability when I go into work every day, which is massively important. I don't think you'd be able to do it without that. But when we first moved to Norway, we didn't have any kids. I was 29, and I took the assistant manager's job at Sarpsborg. And for us, with no kids, it was a perfect opportunity to go and try and do something different. So we were quite excited by that. My first daughter was born in Sarpsborg just after the first year of being there. And then I got a job offer on the southwest coast of Viking in Stavanger, which is obviously a really big club, and it was a big move at the time. So then we moved down there. My second daughter was born down there. I think that first move was quite a challenge because she was pregnant, and then we had there's only 15 months between the girls. So it was, I think she was home. It rained a lot in Stavanger that winter. So she was stuck in the house. I was away in like Marbella on a training camp, which never goes down too well when your wife's stuck at home with a screaming kid and pregnant in the rain. But we kind of found our way through it, and there was some really difficult parts, especially when the kids were so young. And even now, I think this move, we've had a lot of challenges. The girls have gone from like speaking Norwegian, going back to England for a bit, then now learning Swedish. So they've had some challenges themselves, which I think long term can be really healthy and good for them. But in the moment, when they're upset at leaving or going somewhere else or leaving their friends is quite a challenge. And I think living in the north of Sweden, like for my wife, obviously a long way away from family, from friends, there are some challenging periods with that. But obviously, there's been a lot of positives to the journey, but there are also those side of things which can be a challenge away from the pitch as well.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. I'm also glad I asked. I think I'll make it a staple of these sorts of interviews because it's a very interesting facet to people's lives, and it obviously has a huge impact on people's work, as you mentioned too. I would like to cycle back round to the beginning. Now I've got one more thing to ask you. We spoke to Ian Evert, the manager of Barrow AFC, a couple of weeks ago, who was a fascinating guy to talk to. He told us that he's read The Secret and he has a vision board at home. So I wanted to ask you, what do you read, and do you engage in any mental psychological exercises like that, positive thinking or anything as part of your job? I read plenty of different things, and like I find it hard to read fiction, to be honest. I tend to read things that are related to the work because I'm so interested in it, and I'm so interested. Like I'm learning all the time about leadership processes, trying to win football games and trying to get better. So I think I have such a vested interest in it. Most of the books that I read are
around those kind of things. I think the best book I've read by a long way recently was Legacy, the one with the New Zealand All Blacks,
right?
And the cultural aspects to that. But a lot of the mental psychology books, Chimp Paradox and ones like that, I found really, really interesting into what motivates or what can trigger players or people to do certain things. So I read a lot around the subject that I'm working in.
Do you ever ask the players to read anything particular?
Yeah. I've given them books actually. I've given players books like I remember I had a player that definitely would have benefited from reading the Chimp Paradox book. I don't know if you've read that one.
No.
It's a book by Dr. Steve Peters. It's about, I think it's kind of putting the brain and the mental processes into more layman's terms, and the chimp is what's in your brain, and there's different ways to control the chimp, and there's different actions that it takes, and it's a really, really fascinating book. I know a lot of sportsmen have used it. I think Ronnie O'Sullivan was massive on it, and I had that book, and I saw a player, and I could see that he was not controlling so many of his emotions or way of thinking. So I gave him the book. I was like, listen, you need to read this and come back to me. But he said he got to chapter 4, and it was like reading his own autobiography. And he was like, I think I need to stop now. But I've and also to the staff, we share books between us actually. David Priest, my goalie coach, he loves a book, anything to do with football, and we switch the books that we're reading quite a lot. So yeah, definitely I encourage the player. It really annoys me sometimes when I talk to the players and I say oh, what did you do yesterday when you got back? And they might say, oh yeah, well, as soon as we got back, we logged on to Call of Duty. Well, how long were you on that for? 6 hours. And I'd be like, lads, listen, 6 hours on Call of Duty, right? Read a book, learn how to play golf, or educate yourself. Because I remember Brian Dean said to me in his 20-year playing career, he could have done 3 degrees, and he wished he'd have done 3 degrees if he had his time again. And I think trying to encourage players to do different stuff like that, read books, is really important.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Hey, well, listen, Ian, thanks a million for your time today. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Thanks a lot, guys.
And listen, when you are a Premier League manager in the future, do you promise to come back and do our podcast again?
Yes, I will do. And when I'm a Premier League manager, I can. Then I'll sing you one of the songs from the musical as well.
Oh wow, that's a double down on that promise. That's lovely. Brilliant. Okay, well, listen, thanks a lot, Ian, and we will be back next week with something else. Cheers. Goodbye.